Rabbi Simon Jacobson is author of the best-selling book Toward a Meaningful Life, which has sold over 400,000 copies to date and has been transcribed into Hebrew, French, Spanish, and many other languages. Including Georgian and many others we don't have time to even mention. Rabbi Jacobson heads the Meaningful Life Center, called by the New York Times a spiritual Starbucks, which bridges the secular and the spiritual through a wide variety of live and online programming. For over 14 years, Rabbi Jacobson was editor-in-chief of Vaad Hanachos Hatzmimim when he was responsible for publishing the talks of the late Lubavitcher Rebbe, one of the most influential Jewish leaders of the 20th century. Beginning in 1979, Rabbi Jacobson headed a team of scholars that memorized and transcribed entire talks that the Rebbe gave, which is very impressive because those were during Shabbat, so they had to be memorized, in which he worked very closely with the Rebbe himself. He also headed the research teams for Sefer HaLikudim, an encyclopedic collection of Hasidim thought, which includes 26 volumes over 5 years. Rabbi Jacobson is one of the greatest scholars and most sought-after speakers in the Jewish world today. He has lectured to diverse audiences on psycho-spiritual issues and applying Jewish thought to contemporary life. He has been interviewed on over 300 radio and TV shows, including CBS, CNN, Fox, and NPR. He has also been the chairman and publisher of the Allgemeiner Journal, which, according to CNBC, is the fastest-growing Jewish newspaper in America. Now, Samuel Loncar, who earned his PhD in philosophy and religion from Yale, is a distinguished scholar, writer, and educator whose work bridges science, philosophy, and spirituality. He is the editor of Marginalia Review of Books, founder of the Institute for the Meanings of Science, and creator of the Becoming Human Project. His research on Christianity and anti-Semitism reflects his deep engagement with Jewish thought and history. A sought-after speaker and consultant, his work has been featured globally, including at the Max Planck Institute and the Mosaic magazine. His book, Becoming Human, Philosophy as Science and Religion from Plato to Posthumanism, is forthcoming from Columbia University Press. We're very excited to have our speakers here.
In the center here, so everyone can see me. Good evening. I'm Toby Hecht, one of the directors here. So I wrote some notes down. Didn't want to miss anything. Tonight is very special because I've been waiting for some time to introduce Rabbi Simon Jacobson to my dear friend Samuel Loncar. Rabbi Jacobson is not only a relative of mine, but he taught Tanya to my 12th grade class in Brooklyn many years ago, and I remember thinking how brilliant and humble he was at the same time. I can picture him now at the desk in the classroom on Crown Street. I have known Samuel for more than a decade, and he is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. Not just in terms of knowledge, I don't even know how he stores it all, but in terms of his steadfast curiosity for more. Nothing is beyond him, and he doesn't settle. He is a pursuer of truth. He also introduced me to one of my closest friends and a confidant, Alexandra Barilski, who is not here with us tonight, and though she is here for sure in spirit, who encouraged me and is responsible for helping me write a book about my beloved grandmother. So thank you both for coming up to New Haven, away from your hectic schedules, to be with us here tonight. The invitation for this event read, "The Soul, AI, and the Meaning of Life." Conceptually, soul and AI seem disconnected from each other, at best, if not in total conflict, whereas the meaning of life eclipses both altogether because it fundamentally outweighs either of them as a lifelong search at the core of human identity, and thus resolves the differences at the heart of that perceived conflict. Rabbi Jacobson and Samuel have dedicated their lives to filling those gaps, attempting successfully, each in their own way, to unite all three through determining what is a meaningful life. Much of today's literature suggests that we are deficient in finding purpose. Our individual and communal raison d'être. Thanks, Eli, as always. Reason for being.
The reason we keep Eli around.
Yes, exactly. Always. Eli, you cannot leave New Haven, no matter how hard you try. It's true that in looking to science, technology, and philosophy, we have found many answers to solve human longevity. But the method of living well remains unsolved. And perhaps we are asking the wrong questions. Maybe it's fear of the truth. Being human assumes language like autonomy, freedom, independence, a sense of self, our vision of dignity. Can it also mean submitting to something greater than the self? Not only the recognition, but the knowledge of the unity of the divine, that which supersedes that freedom we cherish, our intellect, our degrees, our successes, our tenure plan, our mortality. So then the question is not really about identity. Are you a believer or not? What's real, what isn't, what matters, and what doesn't, but rather how we go about identifying the answers to these questions. The method of that pursuit is the purpose of life. I know that after tonight, we may leave with more questions, even the dreaded need for introspection. Yet I guarantee the motivation will be less about fear or doubt and more about desire and drive to know more and to learn more about the human constitution, our experience, and fulfillment. And with that,
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shmuley, Kobe, for those beautiful words. It's an honor to be co-panelist with Samuel, and thank you for hosting, Kira. And to all of you. I think I'd just like to begin with a story that captures, in a way, my life, which in many ways is part of the discussion this evening. So, as you can see, you have your eyes open. I look like a Jew, right? I have a beard, I have a yarmulke, and I'm a proud Jew. Okay, so let's just establish that right here. And I've never been prouder. However, Yeah. Due to my life experiences and journeys, I have met many people who find me a little strange, different, archaic. Many people have their stereotypes about Jews in general, religion, God, and many things that they think I represent. And most of them are negative stereotypes, I have to say. So one among many, many stories, after my book was published, Toward a Meaningful Life, so the book, the publisher, William Morrow, sent me on a book tour. I don't know if they do that anymore, but back then, we're talking about 1995, 96. Any of you old enough to remember that? Anyone was born then? I feel like the oldest guy in the room. Yeah. You are? They are? Okay. Anyway, they sent me on a book tour. It began with 20 cities. It ended up being 90 cities. And you speak at a bookstore, Barnes & Noble. Those days, there was also Borders. And throughout the day, the publicist set you up with, then there was no internet yet, at least not for the public. So it was print, radio, and TV interviews. This was in Cleveland. So I was booked on the Cleveland morning show, like one of the Good Morning America type of shows, where they feature new authors, like a 5-6 minute interview on the couch. And I come into the studio, scheduled time, like 7:30 in the morning, and I'm welcomed by the producer, and she in turn introduces me to the anchor who's going to interview me. As she walks out and she sees me, literally her jaw dropped, she turned pale, and I don't know what was bothering her, but something, I remember touching my face, maybe, I don't know, I hadn't eaten breakfast yet, so. Anyway, I said, is everything all right? She says, not exactly. So I said, why? She says, I love your book, Toward a Meaningful Life. It's on my night table. I read it almost every night. It's a life-changing book. But I never expected that the author would look like you. Now, I wasn't insulted, just for the record. I said, what did you expect? Because remember, my picture's not in the book, so nobody knows what the author looks like. I said, what did you expect? She said, I expected a 6'2", sexy, skinny-looking guy, clean-shaven. So I said, I thought I looked like some of that. No, maybe 2 out of the 3. I was
like some of that.
Yeah, I was balding already.
You're definitely sexy. I'm not sure about 6'2".
Okay, there you go. Anyway. She said, I'm sorry if I insulted you. I said, no, not at all. You're being honest, and I like that. And I said, so why don't we talk about that? Perfect. Ask me that question. She said, I can't ask that on television. I said, phrase it in a more, I guess, civil way. So we sit down at the couch, and the interview begins, and she says the following. She says, I have a new author here, author of a new book, Toward a Meaningful Life, Rabbi Simon Jacobson. And it's a great book. I recommend it. Covers the entire spectrum of life. And I want to ask you, Rabbi, being that it's such a relevant book to me, and I'm sure to so many other readers, wouldn't it be more acceptable if you looked like one of us? That's the way she put it. If you looked like one of us. So I said, this is all live TV, by the way. It's not rehearsed. There's no editing. Whatever you say is on the record. So I said to her, I don't think you'd be able to get away if I was a Saudi Arabian prince dressed in one of those garments or in some other cultural garment. I think you can only say that because I'm Jewish. They would never allow that. And I said it with a smile. I didn't mean to offend her. I just wanted to make my point. So I said, but on the contrary, I don't understand. Why are we judging each other by our looks? I wouldn't ask you to change your garments or change your look. We're souls trying to connect with each other. Souls transcend garment. Labels are for clothing, not for people. And maybe this is a good opportunity for us to see if we can connect about things we believe in, about our souls, about our deeper meaning in life. And instead of getting caught up with these outer stereotypical images and looks. Anyway, it ended up being a great conversation, and she was really appreciative. And it was because she started with this provocative question. So this is a world I straddle 2 worlds. I grew up in Crown Heights, USA. You've heard of this place? Yes. It's in a little town called New York, a little south from here. And, right. And my parents were both Russian-born. They came to the country, the United States, after World War II. I'm the oldest of 5 children. And I grew up in a very intense Jewish community, Chabad, Lubavitcher community. Went to yeshiva from 7 in the morning till 9 at night, the whole thing. But thank God I grew up also in a home that was non-dogmatic. You know that word, dogmatic? Yeah. Okay, I was wondering if any of you were going to say that you absolutely believe without any proof in dogma. But nobody said that. Okay. So I grew up in a non-dogmatic home. My father was a journalist. My mother, both of them, very well read. And my home, we were never silenced. Ideas were welcome. Skepticism was welcome, which really worked well for me because I'm naturally skeptical. And I was able to go on my journey while getting a very intense Jewish education, also to find what I believe in. You know, not something that I'm just conforming to or fitting into someone else's expectations. I remember when my son came home from school many years ago, and he said to me, I'm really excited about something. I saw he was really excited. I said, he was 7 years old. So I said, what are you so excited about? He says, I heard today in school that you were born an original, don't become a copy. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah. And I remember it till this day. And the years passed. Today he's a father of his own. He lives in Pittsburgh. And I asked him recently, I said to him, do you remember that story? He said, no, he didn't even remember. That's how it is. One day you'll be parents, you'll understand. And so I said to him, so what happened with you? Are you a copy or an original? Now, no pun intended, he happens to be a copywriter. He's a creative director. So he says to me, I'm an original copy, whatever that means, another cryptic line. So I was able to grow up in a home, as I said, with strong standards, high values, and very intense, but also to try to find my own originality, my own voice, my own song, which is not easy to do in our world, because every community, whether you grew up in a home of believers or non-believers, atheists, agnostics, moderate atheists or radical atheists, and so on, everyone is shaped by our parents, whether you like it or not. Maybe you're trying to rebel against it, maybe you've embraced it, maybe you don't even know how to deal with it, but in our impressionable years, we're affected by our society. That's how it is. By parents, by education, by community, today by the media. I mean, I don't need to list it all. You all know we're inundated, and people don't want you to everyone likes to think out of the box and let's be a little different, but not too different. You know, you don't want to be weird. And therefore, those pressures tend to sometimes, as Oliver Wendell Holmes puts it so powerfully in his tragic poem called The Voiceless, where he says, alas, to those that die with their song still inside them. You hear that? Alas to those that die with their song still inside them. We all have unique song inside of us, but often we're forced to sing someone else's song, and we never even discover who we are, and we don't have the courage to do so. So to me, the journey that I grew up with is one really, as I said, trying to integrate these two worlds. On one hand, a very modern world with all its advancements, but very often a world that does not allow your soul to be itself, to discover who you are. And whatever it is, it's the pressures, the demands, all the psychological forces that impact us. So in a way, being here, standing here this evening, I feel it's a great opportunity to talk about this because I know it's a universal challenge we all have. And especially as a teacher and a mentor, I've always dealt with this because I've always dealt with the secular world. And I'll just share one more anecdote that really captures it. What's my time frame here? Yeah, okay. So I remember years ago I started giving a class. It was in New York City. And the core group happened to be people from the arts and entertainment industry. Musicians, songwriters, poets, some Jews, some non-Jews. They were all spiritual, but hardly traditional. So it was a very interesting confluence here of two different worlds. I would say my spirituality came from Jewish mysticism mostly. Though, of course, I've read other schools and so of thought and so on. But there in that group, most would probably say that their spirituality came from Zen Buddhism or a thing called LSD, which is not an acronym for those that are interested in Let's Start Davening. Okay? So I realized that even before I opened my mouth and share an idea, as I said before, my look was not neutral. And I know in communication, even before you speak, people are already judging you, whether they like it or not. They fit you into some box or some stereotype. So I didn't know what people were thinking. I was thinking, here I am still sitting there, with a beard and a yarmulke, maybe like the story in Cleveland that I shared. I may remind someone of an angry grandparent that schlepped him to synagogue on Yom Kippur against his will. I may be reminding him of an irrelevant Hebrew school teacher, or frankly, maybe war memories. So I tried an experiment. This is a real experiment in real time. I can't call it scientific, but it worked. And the experiment was, I decided I'm not going to use any language, any words that have any religious connotations, no Jewish connotations, nothing based on Bible, anything that can be misinterpreted. I decided I'll create my own language. And that's what I did. Instead of God, I used the words like higher reality, the essence of it all. If it was a particularly New Age group, I used words like indeterministic layers of undefined energy, or something like that. And instead of Torah, or Bible, I use the word blueprint. Instead of mitzvot and good deeds, I use the word connections. And instead of redemption, or what some would call Messiah, Geula, and so on, I use the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent and pontificating about touching the essence of all of reality, reaching places by traveling through this blueprint, making these connections, and finally creating seamless fusion between the indeterministic and the deterministic, between the outer and the inner, between form and function, between soul and body, into one beautiful, seamless harmony that transcends diversity and brings everything together in this one synchronicity of one wholeness, but at the same time respecting the dignity of each individual. That was the tone. And I went on like that for hours. It was great. They were listening, and weeks went by. Finally, a guy came over to me. I don't know if any of you remember or know of a group called Jay and the Americans. They were a rock group in the 60s. They had some big hits. Anyway, he was a part of that group. His name was Kenny Vance. And he comes over to me. Before the class, he says to me, everyone loves this class. This is like unbelievable stuff. I'm just wondering, are you talking about God? As I said, yes, but don't spoil it. But don't spoil it for the others. Anyway, so I let the cat out of the bag already. But my point was, it worked a lot better than I expected, this experiment, because I did not use any words that anyone could interpret. So it was words that everyone felt were neutral, even scientific, you can say. And I realized, we talk so much about communication, connecting through words. Don't be silent. Nobody knows what you're thinking. She doesn't know what you feel. He doesn't know what you mean, all that. But words could also be loaded. I can use a word that's innocuous to me, but it'll cause you to go crazy because your mother went ballistic every time she heard that word or whatever. So to be very careful when we use words. And I find my biggest challenge, frankly, is not to communicate ideas, but to uncommunicate. To try to strip things from these myths and stereotypes and distortions. So finally, in my opening remarks, I would like to just say, very much as Toby put it so well, indeed, when we talk about AI, the soul, talk about meaning of life, I think before we even, everyone's so amazed about what it's capable of doing, you have to know your definitions. I would just put this right there on the table, and I'm sure we'll talk about it throughout the evening. Like people ask me the question, the big two visions of the future, will it be an apocalyptic one where machines will take over like in the Matrix? Or will it be a utopian vision of the future with AI and all its developments? It's a big question, and they're debating it. But it also comes down to what exactly is intelligence, and what exactly is a human being, and what is exactly a machine. So let's put it very bluntly. If you think you're a robot and a machine, I can assure you that the machines that will be built will be better than you. That's not even a question. They once thought that chess masters would never be able to be beat by a machine. the top ones. And that's not the case any longer. But if you're something more than a machine, then we have a fighting chance. So maybe I look at AI really as a challenge to what is the human being? Who are we? It's going to force us to have to define ourselves. If we're just efficient machines and we're able to function well and survive, we will build better ones, more powerful ones, immortal ones even. And on the other hand, this is a real, I would say, a battle for the soul. And what is a soul? There we go again, another word that I wouldn't use in that conversation because every one of us has a different meaning, but I'd like to talk about it more as this evening goes on. So that's my opening remarks. And the bottom line I'd like to say is that I have no doubt, as a real optimist, that the soul will prevail, that the machines, no matter how good they are, will force us and propel us to new heights that we've never seen before, and we will be forced to become exactly that. And if not, we will become obsolete. But I'm confident that the first will happen because that's what human beings are like. And I see it already happening, that we will go through a really, what I would call, after the agricultural and the industrial and the information revolution, a new revolution that we're at the verge of entering, a spiritual revolution, where we'll realize that all the material in this world and all the successes in the world are just a big tool chest. And the question is how you're going to use that tool chest. And we're going to be compelled to look at our values, what we love, what are we ready to fight for, and what do we truly believe in, but not just in an ambiguous way, but in a way that we're ready to really give our lives for. And I mean that in a positive way. So I feel this is like really, we're living through history right now. This is a historical moment, and you're all blessed, we're all blessed to be here, because how we will behave will define the next generation and the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Molly and Toby, for the wonderful opportunity and for those beautiful words. Toby, I really appreciate it, and I'll pass them on to Alex. And thank you so much to Rabbi Jacobson. I've been watching Rabbi Jacobson's YouTube channel now for years. As a professional philosopher of religion and science, when you discover someone of Rabbi Jacobson's quality for free, you can imagine the kind of joy it is. I'm amazed that mainstream media hasn't realized the revolution that's already taken over the world, which is the world's best teachers are basically free. And the idea was that that could never happen because how could they make money? And it turns out the mitzvahs of the Torah is true, that if you give generously, as every tradition teaches, somehow the universe has a way of always bringing it back to you. The questions we face today are questions that require first-order thinking, questions about the meaning of life. The great filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky said, by spirituality, I mean, first of all, question of the meaning of your life. So by the term spirituality, I'm going to use spirituality to mean the question of the meaning of your life. And I want to explain what the Becoming Human Project is about and bring a report from the frontiers of science as I see them. I'm a philosopher of science, so you could say, well, you're not a real scientist. That's what a lot of scientists think about everyone who doesn't have a PhD in the natural sciences. That's not what any fair-minded scholar thinks. We all recognize we're doing different kinds of work. In German, French, and other languages, the sciences mean everything in a university. But I have a view of philosophy which is very different than academic philosophy. Because of the work I did at Yale, I made a major discovery, and it's this. What we call religion and science are modern inventions, and the historical context to understand them is philosophy as a way of life. This is the essence of my work. It is a historically incontestable fact. My book establishes it. All the scholars who are familiar with the argument know the facts are true. But facts being true does not give us a vision of their meaning. What does it mean to say science and religion are modern inventions that to be understood have to be placed in their historical context? Well, it turns out that the atheism I think that's most popular in modernity is the atheism against history. People act as if because there's discomfort in the past, which we see as one of the fundamental crises on campus and around the world, the impossibility of negotiating with the truth of our past. The truth of the human past is horrific. It's beautiful and it is absolutely horrific. And if you choose to be judicious and honest, you will have to report on the horrors as well as the blessings. Why does that matter? Well, you could say there's nothing scientific about that. Has any of you heard of the alignment problem in AI? Do you understand the alignment problem is unsolvable and that I get paid a great deal of money by clients to explain why? AI ethics, which is a very important cutting-edge field, can go nowhere unless it can answer fundamental spiritual questions about what humans are. Why? Because the problem with AI alignment is that alignment is impossible when the people doing the alignment are not aligned. The data sets that create the horrendous bias in AI that we have recently discovered, of course, cause many, many people of color, for example, to be arrested based on simply biased data, not the algorithms. As many of the scientists realize, it's much more disturbing. The algorithms are great. The data is the problem. What is the data? It's what we have said and done. The data of human action is what creates the alignment problem. Because if you feed all of human history into an honest system that could eventually process it, you will get an absolute set of contradictions. And so all of the problems in alignment, particularly the problems around so-called super alignment, related to the issue of so-called superintelligence, are actually forms of philosophical anthropology that are existentially urgent in tech, policy, global governance, and computer science. So it turns out core scientific and policy problems today are actually part of the history of philosophy. And so if you want to approach those problems not simply with their current form, but to place them in a context where you have the hope of resolving them meaningfully, we have to see a much bigger picture of the human species than what we have in our society. So the vision of philosophy I have is a revival of the ancient worldview that I believe Rabbi Simon Jacobson embodies, which is, how is it that someone who has the abilities, I don't know if you've seen Rabbi Jacobson's video on memory, but you heard Kira, and I thank you very much, Kira, for your hosting's introduction, that Rabbi Jacobson has this capacity that during Shabbat, with the Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, he could remember an entire talk for hours and transcribe it, I understand, verbatim. You think about that. That's a form of what we would call superintelligence. It's extremely relevant to people doing cognitive psychology to understand, how is that possible? And we're not nearly curious enough, although I appreciate your curiosity, in the wonders of the human brain. The human brain is absolutely wondrous and inexplicable. And the patterns between it and neural nets and the capacity to then systematize meaning, this is related to our most ancient traditions. What's the one tradition that still treats scripts as alphanumeric? Kabbalah. How does AI work in the most fundamental sense? We've been able to take all of the written output of human beings and convert them into numbers, and specifically in the case of LLMs, vectors. So what we're doing is taking everything we've said and making a new level of meaning. So what AI is confronting us with is ourselves. And the alignment problem, the biggest problem, the problem that Nick Bostrom got a whole millions of dollars in prestige at Oxford to have a center around, oh, maybe we'll create a super intelligent machine that'll kill us all, so let's do that. It's a very strange argument, but this is the argument also of Sam Altman and others at OpenAI. There's a great danger around superintelligence, so let's have an arms race to see who can monetize and privatize it first. So there's clearly not a totally serious idea that if you really said we're going to discover something greater than nuclear weapons and unambiguously as destructive, why would we support with billions of dollars anyone doing that? But we are doing that. So we are a contradictory species. And the hope that we can use computers to iron out our contradictions is actually belied by the beauty of science, which in pursuit of truth, we discover realities that destroy our ego's idea of ourselves. If your idea of your society and culture is that you're basically okay, and then you put all of your data into an AI, guess what you're going to find out? You're not basically okay. You're systematically oppressing certain groups. You're systematically misrepresenting people. We see through the alignment problem that the history of humanity is a kind of elaborate story of gaslighting people who aren't in power. And these are very serious problems. They require all the smartest people working at the level of the computer science and the algorithms. But they also require people like Rabbi Jacobson and others from traditions who are deeply informed about the fundamental issue, what is a human being? This is what gave birth to the revolution of philosophy. About 2,600 years ago, a person named Pythagoras, who you've probably all heard of, invented not only what we think of as the foundations of the Western mathematical tradition, the Western diatonic musical tradition. He was a very strong believer also in the wrongness of animal sacrifice. He believed in what scholars call metempsychosis, a fancy word for reincarnation. That's right. So behind our mathematical and spiritual traditions is a single tradition of people who always thought science as the highest aspiration of the mind to know exists within a framework of realizing what it truly means to be human. If you separate the pursuit of knowledge from the pursuit of meaning, what you get is knowledge that serves the agendas of whoever has discovered it. So I ask you a simple question, which is something I've posed to a recent client. We know OpenAI will never achieve ethical superintelligence. Why? Because no one trusts Sam Altman with a nuclear bomb. And I'm not criticizing Sam Altman, I'm just saying everyone who was the original member of his board has left, and all for similar reasons, and all of them very judicious. And I'm not criticizing him, he's an amazing entrepreneur. But would you trust Sam Altman with power greater than a nuclear weapon, given what you know about him? It's a very simple question. I wouldn't trust myself with that. So we're not being serious right now as a species. On the one hand, we're putting more money and energy into AI than into any tech revolution in history. Even thinking about reviving small nuclear power. If you guys are investors, you probably know the nuclear industry has some people looking in hope that maybe there's going to be a revival of nuclear because of how much energy we currently put into it. What if we put the same amount of energy into asking, what does it mean to be human? If we want to be able to use the super development of our abilities, maybe the first thing we need to do is ask, where did these abilities come from? How is it a Jewish rabbi, a man who, as the woman said, looks like you, reaches the entire world with a wisdom that doesn't have any coding, doesn't need any name, doesn't need any specific vocabulary? Why? Because it's true. That's what philosophy is about. I don't care what you call me. Philosopher, spiritual teacher, philosopher of religion, philosopher of science. They all matter for context. Context for clients, context for publishing, context for dinner engagements. At bottom, the question that unites us all is, what does it mean that we're human? And I would submit to you, that's not an obvious question. Or we wouldn't be so divided on our visions of how to build good human societies and good human lives. And I'm a great believer in the potential of what's happening in AI. I also think it will be catastrophic, as it is already becoming, because we're becoming illiterate. I don't know if you've noticed. But literacy rates are plummeting, and this is not just in the West, but it is in the West. Places like Germany, famous for their education, have serious educational crises. The US, everyone knows, has not been able to educate. COVID really destroyed the lives of many young people educationally. But this is a kind of culmination of a long trajectory of a decline in the capacity to decode text. Well, there's a tradition that in spite of all of its incredible vicissitudes and the persecution against it, there's a tradition of people who, without any formal degrees, have gone on doing what they've done exactly like the ancient philosophical schools, gathered around a shared way of life in reverent submission to a profound idea that the universe has a creation, an origin, and therefore a purpose and a destiny. And within that worldview and their shared practices that no one imposed upon them, they have produced this book, if you don't mind, Ellen. They've given us wisdom, that not just from Rabbi Jacobson, but, as he says, the wisdom of the Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. So it doesn't matter, as I often tell students when I taught at Yale, it doesn't matter what you think about religion. Religion has defined the horizon of your identity. Just as it doesn't matter whether you're a scientist, scientist has defined the horizon of our identities. And guess what? There is a view of philosophy that is scientific. In one of my most recent YouTube lectures, I predicted the next 10 years of science, and I made 3 predictions. You can see them. One of them is already coming true, if you know the work of Michael Levin in biology. So I will tell you one of the things I predicted that is coming true. We're living through the greatest revolution in biology. I'm currently running a project related to it, and I'm going to publish an interview I hosted with Sir Paul Nurse, the director of the Francis Crick Institute, next month, with Philip Ball. The revolution in biology has brought back, you know what concept in biology? Purpose. Purpose is now a central concept in biology, and it was absolutely eliminated from modern science in the 17th century. And it is an essential concept in modern biology. Not intelligent design, but purpose at the level of organisms. Michael Levin and a co-author, Chris Fields, I think from Harvard, just published a new paper in which they made an argument using cognitive science that all systems that exist and maintain their organization of space and time, not just living systems, require essentially features that we currently think of as like life. Levin is the director of the Institute for Alien Biology at Tufts University. And so he says, so basically, where are the aliens? He literally just said this on X, all around us. In other words, within the next 10 years, we're going to see the borders between biology and physics break down. And I predicted this because my view of philosophy is if it's right, put your money where your mouth is, make predictions, build projects, organize scientists, and help do something. We can all do this. And if you're wrong, correct it and get better. So the view of science we were taught, that science is just these itty-bitty things that maybe you can be very technical, but the big things don't matter, this is breaking down. All of the leading, most elite scientists are talking to each other in different fields. Cognitive science as a field has already begun the bridging that led to so much in AI between computer science, the philosophy of mind, and many other fields of technical programming and mathematics. Now all of mathematics is coming into computer science. Geometric models, models that use the latest work literally in topology are now being used to build systems. So science has gotten to a point where all of the scientific disciplines are converging. Hence the issue of how do we make sense of this? What is the meaning of science in this world? And we used to think, well, we can't say anything about that scientifically. That's not true. If by scientifically you mean, can you make an informed, judicious assessment about the meaning of science? The answer is yes. People will disagree. That informed, judicious assessment, I think, looks something like this. We are living through the most exciting period in human history, when if we decide to recognize that our advance in knowledge, if it were met by an equal advance in existential passion, to recognize your own life is infinitely more valuable than anything you can know about the material world, as beautiful as that is. If you can combine the mystery of your own existence as being infinitely worth your time, that it's infinitely worth your time to discover, what does it mean to be me? What does it mean to have the history I have? How do I relate my freedom to this past? If we put as much passion and money into that, at the same time that we then thought as a community, bringing all of our expertise together, how can we think to use these great tools to serve us and not destroy us? Then I think we will enter into a utopia. But that will be a battle, because there are already people who call your body a flesh bag, who say it's going to be gone by 2050 in the singularity, and who are happy that you won't have a biological body anymore. That's called transhumanism, and I think it's dark side. That's a real vision, and it's not an obscure one. As many of you know, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, many other very famous billionaires have a version of the transhumanist ethos that says, let's get rid of our bodies, let's get rid of our biology, let's turn ourselves into machines. That's not science, it's spirituality. It's not science, it's spirituality, but it's a spiritual interpretation of the science, and my point is that's unavoidable. Every scientist has a spiritual interpretation of the meaning of their own life and their career. Their colleagues will often disagree. The history of science will often disagree, but we can't live without meaning, and we can't live without purpose. And acting like we can ask AI what our purpose is, as if we aren't making it, as if what it's not confronting us with is ourselves, undeniably unedited. AI stops us from gaslighting ourselves about how we aren't what we think we are. We are something infinitely grander than what we have thought we are, and infinitely more terrible. And I believe the question of human purpose is a project. We don't start knowing who we are. We have to become who we are. And that's what the Becoming Human Project is all about, unifying the resources of science, spirituality, and history to address that question. And I couldn't be more privileged to share that conversation with you and Rabbi Jacobson. Thank you.
So I'd like to share a few comments on what Samuel just said. I couldn't agree more. I just wanted to add, particularly, I think history is vital to understand how we got here. You know, we can't understand the future if you don't know the past. I've done a lot of research and study, and a big question that I'm sure many of you have heard about, and that is, when did science and religion diverge? Because there was a time that the doctors of this world were soul doctors. Spirituality and the material world were seen as one. So approximately what we identify as being the time of the Enlightenment, right after the Renaissance. And but cut straight to the chase, the real culprit is the distortion of religion and its abuse by its authorities and leaders, that finally people said enough is enough. And it was the so-called open-minded thinkers and scientists that began to challenge the authority of the church. You know, the Galileo story is maybe the best one, where he was forced to recant his scientific discoveries because it contradicted the church doctrine. And ever since, there became this, I would say, worse than tenuous, but this tremendous tension of two different worlds. Science was meant to replace religion. If you read Voltaire and some of the other French Enlightenment, they will basically say that within 200 years from now, and they're talking about the 18th century, 20th century, there will be no more religion except for the masses, the asses. I don't know the word for it in French. Do we have a French expert?
No, not the word for,
Eli, I'm so glad.
For the
The plebeians.
I'm so glad you're speaking French.
anyway, a derogatory term for the peasants. But that's not what happened. Not only is religion still a vibrant force, many.
Paysan. Paysan.
no, paysan is peasants, he means like.
I'm French.
No, it's a word, I think it's almost like the garbage. There's a word for like the garbage. Anyway. But maybe you don't know that character in France, you know.
You gotta read more Voltaire.
Okay. Anyway,
Anti-Semite.
let's not get caught up in semantics. The point being is that that's not what has happened. And I believe a big part of the conflicts that are going on right now is this continuous inability to find peace between faith and science. And it's very clear, especially those that are more sophisticated, who realize, yes, it's true that there were those that abused religion, and it's true that that should be rejected. But there are other parts of faith that are the driving forces of the most noble drives in the human being. So I think AI is actually going to be a market correction in this regard. That's one comment I wanted to make, because I think all of us, if you really think about it, your own conflicts, your own personal conflicts between whether it's faith or whether it's values or whether anything you believe in is very relevant to this period in time. And as I said, as AI develops, it's going to force us to have to address that issue. Another point I wanted to just make, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Yes, I totally agree with the concept of, I did write Toward a Meaningful Life, so obviously meaning is significant. But I think it goes even deeper than that. How many of you in business school? Yeah. Okay. Small minority, good. Yeah, someone has to fund the AI, right?
Someone has to pay for dinner. What do you mean, yeah.
There you go. There we go. Good rabbi.
You raise your hands again, we can get names now.
Anyway, you don't need Business 101 to know the following statement. There's no business, there's no institution, no organization, nothing can exist that does not have a mission statement, right? That's indisputable. A mission statement is as Mike Samuel just said, purpose, coming back into biology and so on, you have to have a mission. If someone came to you for an investment of $100 and you asked them, what's your mission statement? And they would tell you, well, we're still working on it, or it's going to take several months for me to explain it to you, or we have several options, or something, some platitude, you wouldn't give them a penny. Mission is the focus. And even companies with mission statements usually don't even succeed, let alone without one. So here's a personal question that I ask each of you. What is your personal mission statement in life? Now, most people will answer, I've tested this, to be happy. That's what most people say. Or to make money. When I have money, I can do whatever I want. Or to bring up a healthy family. You know, maybe throw in a few values. Those are all beautiful answers. But do they qualify as a mission statement? A mission statement has to be short, unique, measurable. So if Google or any of the big monsters came out and said their mission statement is to make money or to have happy employees or happy customers, that's not enough. It has to be unique. I think Google's mission statement is to organize all the information in the world and make it readily accessible. There's not an ad for Google, by the way, just one that came up. I think Microsoft's is a computer in every home and in every office. I don't know if it's still that mission. Point being is, what is your personal mission statement? And I wouldn't be surprised if you would answer, I don't know, or I never even thought of it. I'll tell you why, because why did you think? Do they teach it in the school? Do they teach it at home? So usually at some point in life, you start asking yourself, why am I here? But by then you're already on a 90-mile-an-hour roller coaster, trying to make ends meet, and you don't even have the time and the luxury to think about it too much. So I would say the single most important commodity, especially in our time, is going to be not fossil fuels, not even information is going to be purpose and meaning. From young age, teach your children, why are you here? Whatever that answer may be, but it has to be a compelling answer because everything else is determined by that. Because if your mission is arbitrary or it's ambiguous, then everything you commit to is also going to be arbitrary. If you don't really matter, how much can your decisions really matter? If you're one speck of sand on a big beach, one person among 8 billion people, who really cares? If someone asked you, would the world be different if you were never born? What would your answer to that question? So most people giggle or whatever, and then you think about it. I say, remember, before you were born, nobody knows you're coming, so it's not like you're missing from the scene if you don't show up. So it's a cosmic question, a big cosmic question. Of course you matter to your family and to the few people that love you and so on, but on a cosmic level, would the world be any different if you never existed? And if your answer is, I'm not sure, you tell me what are the consequences of that. And these are the biggest questions I believe are most relevant in our time, and they're going to shape everything else we do. We think machines are going to answer that question for us. No way. They will have even more flawed answers than we do because they're only feeding off of us. So some food for thought. I'd love to hear what you...
What's your mission statement?
How did I know that was coming? Because every time I talk about it, they say, okay, what's yours,
Yet Mitchell was the only one to ask it.
Of course.
Okay, you can
Gotta be short, remember?
rest assured that I have one.
Unique and short.
Yeah. But are we going to go around the table and ask everyone too? Okay.
Don't take long.
My mission, which I discovered around 17 years old, so I like to say that I'm 17 years old with 51 years of experience. Okay? My mission is to use my skills of communication and writing and ability to understand somewhat human psychology to help people find their mission. Or to put it in different ways, to unclutter the means from the ends, to be able to discover your voice instead of the voice of others. That's my mission. And I stick to it till this day.